Hi everyone, this is Tally Palmer again, and as you know I work at the Institute for Water Research at Rhodes University in South Africa, and we are the host of the African Research Universities Alliance Water Centre of Excellence. And we're running this course, an open courseware course on the adaptive systemic approach, and we're starting with Module 1, Unit 1, the introduction, and we're on to Unit 1.3, which addresses the question, how is the adaptive systemic approach practical? Now, these units build on each other. So I'd like you to remember that we all live in a catchment, that water falls out the sky, rains up in the highland and all over, and water flows down towards the sea, and people use it for irrigation, for sanitation, in cities and in rural areas, carrying water and engaging in spiritual activities, but that all of these are connected and that together they comprise a social ecological system that is complex in nature. Now, one of the things about the adaptive systemic approach is that it comprises a logical set of steps. And just take a moment for me to introduce you to this photograph of the Water Centre of Excellence. This is all of us gathered in the Institute for Water Research at our very first workshop, where we gathered together to greet each other and to work out how we were going to work together with the Secretary General of the African Research University Alliance, Prof. Ernest Arieti. So here we go. Here's the summary of steps. Really easy. There are only 4 steps. Step 1 is to bound or understand the boundary of your case study and problem. Secondly is the adaptive planning process, where you plan how to undertake your project. Then there are 3 concurrent steps, or 3 things that happen in step 3. You get on with undertaking your research that addresses the problem or issue. You alert stakeholders to the fact that in a complex system, you need to engage in strategic adaptive management. And you alert your stakeholders to the fact that if you want the impact from the research to be sustained, then local stakeholders have to be, or local people who are experiencing the problem have to be knitted in with the local governance of the problem, so that you get a local influence into decisions. And then, if you want social learning to work, and this goes back to the last unit, you need to be participatory, because that's the social part of social learning. You need to learn, obviously. Here we go, you need to learn, but then you also need to reflect, because you need to think back together, and reflection and learning go together. And together, this participatory reflection and learning helps you to monitor and evaluate your progress. So let's just go through these steps. And again, we'll be going, this is an introduction to the ASA. So other units and modules will be going into these steps in much more detail. But you start with identifying the stakeholders. Who's involved in this problem? Who experiences it? Who manages it? Who has an interest in it? And you describe, you bound, you can't have everybody. So you find out who are the core people and who are the peripheral people, and you kind of map out which people are engaged in this issue and what is their relationship to each other and to the problem. Then you go and you find the geographical extent. You look at the maps, you find existing information. There might be social information on income and biophysical information on rainfall and how much water there is, or pollution. You get to grips with the scope of the scale. What are your time frames? How do those affect the problem? What is the spatial relationship geographically and the spatial relationship in governance? And are people, what scale are people involved at? The individual, the family, the village, the town, the city, and what is the nature of the relationships among your stakeholders? And then you get to identify the research questions. What are the questions you need to know? What is the scientific information you're trying to collect in order to address this question? What is the research that needs to have the impact that needs to be embedded in the system? And what's unusual about the ASA is this identification of research questions happens with people. It's a co-identification of research questions together with stakeholders. Now, the next step is something called an adaptive planning process, and the details for how to run an adaptive planning process can be found in this little handbook, and this is where you can find it. But a summary is that the researchers and stakeholders together have already engaged in the bounding process, so they know something about the context. But what they need to do is to have a co-identified idea of where they want to go to. Now, one of the ways to do that, or one of the starting points, is to get people to download what's worrying them about the problem. So you go around equally, you randomly call on different people until you've heard from everybody and you've collected all of the problem statements related to this issue. And as everybody says their problem, you write it down so everybody actually sees their concern up on the wall. And then you collectively say, even if we're here for 3 days, which is the longest time of an adaptive planning process, usually they're 1 or 2 days, could we actually solve all of these issues that you're worried about? No. So what we actually have to do here in this workshop is to collectively design a plan that you're confident together might address the problem. So what do? We start by acknowledging the problem, and I ask people to do something quite funny. I ask them to stand up, and you're not going to see me so well if I stand up, but anyway, we're going to try this. I ask people to stand up, and I ask them to imagine that they've got themselves into a mud puddle, a really deep one, and I ask them to say, express the words that tell us where you are in this mud puddle. You might be cold and stuck and uncomfortable and irritated and angry. And then I say, okay, now lift your legs up one at a time. One at a time, out, oh, okay, and the other one out. And then suddenly you're standing out of the mud puddle. And then I ask you to take the biggest jump you can away from the mud puddle. 1, 2, 3, jump. I'm not a very good jumper, as you can see. But anyway, once you have jumped away from the mud puddle, you turn around and look back at it. And you say, what I've done is I've jumped into the future. I've jumped into a future where we've addressed this problem. Now, what is the vision of that future? What are the components of what it would feel and be like to have solved or addressed or shifted this problem? And you go around and you collect elements of a vision and you write down what that vision of it being solved is. And that gives you the road, that gives you the destination. We want to go in, or not the destination, actually the direction. I want to go in that direction towards that vision. But to do that, we have to move and act. And the one thing that influences the way we act are values. Values are actually what decide how you behave. And one of my really simple examples for that is, did you brush your teeth this morning? If you did, if you actually picked up a toothbrush and brushed your teeth, it's because you value brushing teeth. And so values determine what you actually do. And so together we share what our values are. And there might be things like honesty, transparency, trustworthiness, truthfulness. And once we've written those down, they describe a value system that we can hold ourselves accountable to. We can say, but we agreed we were going to behave in this sort of way. Or we can say, are we behaving in a way that is consistent with our values? And that in a complex problem where there is contestation and conflict, it helps to be able to go back to the point where we collectively agreed to a value system of behaving. Then we need to build a rich picture of the context, because it's a complex system, and the more you understand about your system and the elements, the better you are able to manage. And so you collect a wide variety of information in the social area, technical information, economic information, the ecosystem involved, and the politics, because very often actions are constrained by things like politics, economics, things like that. So now we know something about our system. We have conducted V-STEEP, value, social, technical, economic, ecological, political analysis. Now, to guide us in building a set of objectives or sub-units of activity that will help us to get to the vision, first of all, we say, let's keep in mind the things about our system that we want to retain. What's excellent about us? What's good? What are the things we value that we don't want to lose, so that in our decision making, we take care of those? And then we look externally and we say, given this vision, what are the threats? What are the big things that might stop us from making progress? Because those two things give us a bit of an envelope for the actions that we plan. And then lastly, you build something called an objectives hierarchy. And so you say, here's my vision. What are the main things that will need to be in place for this vision? I need good governance. I need good financial planning. And then once you've got that in place, what are the things you need to do to build good governance? And you might need 3 things to do that. And so you build this tree of actions when you know that when you start at the bottom of the tree on the things you have to start with, and you can prioritize so that you know which of those objectives you're working towards. And you literally sit together and build this objectives hierarchy and shift things around and discuss it. So you're co-developing, you're co-building, so that all of the stakeholders together look at a vision that they devised or they wrote about together, and an objectives hierarchy that says, it makes sense to us that this is what we have to do. Now you have to get on with the research. So there'll be questions you don't know about. There'll be key things that you need to find out about to shift this problem. And you start to work. Now, you have to be really good at it. If you're going to have an engineer, you need a good engineer. If you're going to have a biologist, you need a good biologist. But then you also have to work in a transdisciplinary way. You have to work together on this problem. You have to put these disciplines together, and you have to remember that you're doing it collectively as stakeholders for each other and society. And you have to accept that this way of working has transaction costs. It takes time. Now, quite a lot of people are unwilling to spend that time. They say, oh, this is just a whole lot of slishy, wishy, nice feeling, waste of time. What I really need is somebody who will sit and do a plan and write the objectives and give it to us, and we can implement it. Well, the problem with that is, in a complex system, it doesn't meet the needs of everybody involved. And very often you end up with things that you can't implement. So in my experience, at least, this is a cost-effective way of using time, but it does take time. Now, every project comes to an end. This research project does not come with a budget for 25, 35, 45 years. Usually it comes with a budget for 3 to 5 years. And what does it leave behind? Does it leave a very excellent piece of research and maybe a paper and a couple of graduated students, or does it actually shift that problem? If you have worked with your stakeholders and with the governance system that is responsible for the problem, and you have embedded your research findings with them as they're discovered, and you have developed the questions with them, and you leave behind relationships of respect and the co-development of a value system, you have a much better chance of leaving a voice, a local voice that can influence decisions that influence local people. And generally, we call this stakeholder empowerment, people who are able to go on into the future using this research. And so you have a process, an action process that is not linked just to a product like a report. You alert people to the fact that if you're dealing with a complex system, stuff changes. So you can't just plan and do and get to your vision, because stuff changes. And so you have to plan and do, but you have to monitor to see whether your doing is taking you to where you want to go to. And if your monitoring says it's okay, then you can go on doing. But if you've got to do something different, then you adapt your plan. And so you have to learn together how to put in place the kind of monitoring that will alert you to the changes you need to be alerted to. It will allow you to change your plan and will allow you to act effectively. So again, you've got to alert your stakeholders to how to structure their organizations so that things are adaptive. Most of our organizations work by rules and recipes, not through adaptive systems. They're messier, but they're more real. And when you encounter problems, which you will, adaptive systems have alerted you to the ways in which you can behave in an adaptable and adaptive way. And then how do you do that? How do you get along in your whole process to manage the complexity? Well, this is what you do. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 5 words that guide you as to how to do this. Participatory is working together. Monitoring is that you know if you want to go there, there are indicators, there are things that will tell you if you're on the pathway to the vision. Then evaluation is looking at how well you're doing in relation to getting to where you want to do. But how do you do this? You do it through reflection and learning. And we talked a little bit last time about social learning. And so you engage with social learning to learn together, and you reflect together so that you learn. Your objectives hierarchy, once you've got it, will lead you to being able to identify who will take responsibility for actions. Indicators will help you say what indicates success in meeting objectives. And your reflection and evaluation will tell you how do you learn from successes as well as learning from failures. We quite often are so shy about saying where we fail that we lose the opportunity to learn from failures. And so those are the steps, and as I said, in other units I'll be going into them in more detail, but that is the adaptive systemic approach. And so next time, in the next unit, we're going to be asking the question, how do we know that the ASA can be effective, that it actually works? So I look forward to joining you for that. See you later.